Amira Malik's life was a picture of devotion and routine. At 47, she lived in a peaceful suburb of Chicago, where her days unfolded with the steady rhythm of faith and family. Each morning began before dawn, when she rose quietly for Fajr, the first of her 5 daily prayers. She would spread out her prayer rug in the corner of her bedroom, facing Mecca, whispering words of submission and gratitude that she had known by heart since childhood. Afterward, she moved to the kitchen, preparing breakfast for her husband, Adil, and their 2 daughters, Laila and Samira. The scent of fresh bread and spices filled the house as the family began their day together. To anyone looking from the outside, Amira seemed to have it all. She worked as a nurse at a bustling hospital, a role she cherished for the opportunity to care for others while serving her community. Her hijab, always neatly arranged, was a symbol of both her identity and her pride. In the Islamic faith, at home she guided her daughters with the same lessons she had learned as a child growing up in Amman, Jordan. Their evenings were filled with recitations from the Quran and discussions about the importance of living a righteous life. Adil often smiled proudly, watching Amira instill the values of their heritage in their daughters. Faith was the cornerstone of Amira's life. Raised in a devout Muslim family, her father had been an imam, and her earliest memories were of sitting at his feet as he explained the verses of the Quran. Moving to America in her early 20s had been a cultural shift, but she had remained deeply rooted in her beliefs. "Faith is our anchor," her father had always said, and Amira took those words to heart. Her prayers, fasting during Ramadan, and unwavering adherence to Islamic teachings shaped every aspect of her identity. And where were we born to the world after all? Amira carried her faith into every corner of her life. At the hospital, her colleagues respected her discipline and devotion. On weekends, she volunteered at the mosque, teaching children the verses she had memorized as a girl. For her, Islam was not just a religion. It was the lens through which she viewed the world, the compass that guided her decisions, and the foundation of her purpose. She felt secure in the knowledge that she was living a righteous life, following the path laid out by Allah. But beneath the surface of this serene and devoted existence, there were moments of quiet restlessness that Amira rarely acknowledged. Occasionally, during her prayers, she felt an inexplicable distance, as if her words were not reaching their intended destination. Sometimes, in the stillness of the night, she would wonder if there was more to faith than the rituals she performed so diligently. These thoughts, however, were fleeting. Amira quickly dismissed them, attributing them to fatigue or a lapse in focus. For years, her life continued in this steady rhythm of devotion and duty, a balance she thought would never falter. But 5 months ago, that carefully constructed world began to crack. It started with something as mundane as a headache, a discomfort she attributed to long shifts at the hospital and the stresses of managing a busy household. What she didn't realize was that this small, seemingly insignificant ailment would mark the beginning of a journey that would forever change her understanding of faith, truth, and the God she thought she knew so well. It was a typical busy morning at the hospital, one that started like so many others for Amira Malik. She had arrived early to prepare for a packed day in the radiology department, where patient after patient needed scans, reviews, and consultations. As she walked through the brightly lit halls, her head throbbed with a dull, familiar ache, one she had grown used to over the past several weeks. She had been brushing it off as stress from the long shifts and the demands of balancing work with home life. After all, she was no stranger to exhaustion. "It's nothing," she told herself again, as she tightened her hijab and stepped into the break room to grab a quick coffee. The day unfolded as expected, busy, fast-paced, and mentally taxing. Amira prided herself on her efficiency, moving quickly between patients while training a new technician, Noor, on the hospital's imaging protocols. She had always been a mentor to new staff, her calm demeanor and precision making her a favorite among colleagues. But today, something felt off. The fluorescent lights overhead seemed unusually harsh, their brightness sending sharp pulses of pain through her temples. At times, her vision blurred, forcing her to blink repeatedly as if to clear her eyes. By late morning, the headache had grown worse, spreading like a band of fire around her head. The edges of her vision began to flicker with faint flashes of light, and a creeping nausea settled in. She paused briefly at her workstation, her hand instinctively gripping the edge of the desk for support. Noor noticed immediately. "Amira, are you okay?" she asked, concern lacing her voice. "Yeah." Amira waved her off with a tight smile. "I'm fine, just a little tired," she replied, unwilling to let on how bad she felt. She hated showing weakness, especially at work, where she had always been the one others relied on. As the hours wore on, the throbbing in her head intensified, but Amira pushed through. There were more scans to review, more patients waiting. She kept telling herself, "Just a few more hours and you'll be home." At one point, she checked her phone during a short break and saw a message from her sister back in Jordan. It was a video of her niece taking her first steps. The sight brought a brief smile to her face, a momentary reprieve from the growing discomfort. She made a mental note to call her sister that evening, not realizing it was a promise she might not get the chance to keep. It happened suddenly and without warning. She was standing in front of a monitor, reviewing a routine patient scan, when the images on the screen blurred into an unrecognizable haze. The room seemed to tilt and spin around her, and a sharp, searing pain shot through her head like a lightning strike. Her hand shot out to steady herself, but her fingers wouldn't cooperate. The chart she was holding slipped from her grasp, papers scattering across the floor. Amira tried to speak, to call for help, but her voice felt trapped inside her chest. "Amira." Nora's voice sounded distant, as if it were coming from the other side of a thick wall. The edges of her vision darkened, and the last thought that flashed through her mind was a desperate plea. "Will someone pick up Layla and Samira from school?" "Yes." Then everything went black. Amira's body crumpled to the floor, and the chaos that followed was immediate. Nora shouted for help, her voice echoing through the radiology department. Fatima, a fellow nurse and Amira's close friend, rushed over, her training kicking in. Within seconds, a code blue was called, and the emergency response team descended on the scene. The team worked quickly, assessing Amira's unresponsive body. Fatima checked her vitals, noting her shallow breathing and weak pulse. "She's crashing," someone said, their voice tense but controlled. The decision was made to rush her to the nearest CT scanner to determine the cause of her collapse. Meanwhile, in the hospital's waiting area, Amira's husband Adil received the phone call that no spouse ever wants to hear. He had been in the middle of a work meeting, discussing designs with clients, when his phone buzzed. The moment he heard the words, "Amira has collapsed," his hands began to shake so violently that he nearly dropped the phone. Within minutes, he was on his way to the hospital, fear gripping his chest as he called a neighbor to pick up their daughters from school. In the CT scanner, the devastating truth was revealed. A blood vessel in Amira's brain had ruptured, causing a massive hemorrhage. The technical term was a subarachnoid hemorrhage, a rare and often fatal type of brain aneurysm. The neurosurgical team was called in, and Amira was wheeled into the operating room with no time to lose. Adil arrived at the hospital just as the surgery began. A nurse explained the gravity of the situation, her voice calm but serious. "Her condition is critical. We're doing everything we can." Adil sank into a chair in the waiting room, his head in his hands. His mind raced with prayers and desperate thoughts. What would he tell their daughters? How could life change so drastically in the blink of an eye? Inside the operating room, the medical team worked tirelessly. Dr. Sarah Yoon, the lead neurosurgeon, gave clear, rapid instructions to her team. But despite their best efforts, Amira's heart suddenly stopped. The monitors flatlined, and the air in the room grew tense. "Starting compressions," Dr. Yoon said firmly as another doctor prepared an injection of epinephrine. The seconds stretched into what felt like hours as they fought to bring her back. Meanwhile, Amira's body lay lifeless on the table, her pulse gone, her pupils unresponsive. By all medical definitions, she was clinically dead. But as the team worked to restart her heart, Amira's spirit was experiencing something far beyond the confines of that operating room. The scene transitions to a glowing light, soft and inviting, as Amira's voice begins to narrate again. The moments following Amira's collapse were a blur of action and urgency. Noor, frozen for a brief second, quickly snapped into motion, shouting for help as she knelt beside her unconscious colleague. Within moments, Fatima, another nurse who had worked alongside Amira for years, arrived and checked for a pulse. It was faint and irregular. "Code blue in radiology?" Fatma's voice rang through the hospital's intercom system, cutting through the routine sounds of a busy ward. Doctors, nurses, and technicians sprang into action, rushing toward the scene. Amira was carefully placed on a stretcher and rushed down the corridor, the wheels of the gurney squeaking loudly as they pushed through the swinging double doors of the emergency ward. The team worked methodically, connecting her to monitors and delivering oxygen to stabilize her weakening vitals. Dr. Samuel Park, the on-call physician, arrived within minutes, his calm demeanor belying the seriousness of the situation. He quickly assessed her condition. "We need a CT scan now," he instructed, his voice steady but urgent. The scan revealed the worst. A ruptured brain aneurysm had caused a massive subarachnoid hemorrhage, flooding her brain with blood and putting immense pressure on her skull. Dr. Park grimaced as he reviewed the images. "Prep the OR. We need to operate immediately," he ordered. Meanwhile, Adil arrived at the hospital, his face pale as he pushed through the crowded waiting room. He spotted Fatima, who approached him with a somber expression. "She's in critical condition, Adil. The doctors are doing everything they can," she said softly. "What happened?" Adil's voice was barely a whisper, his hands trembling. "She was fine this morning. She collapsed suddenly," Fatima explained, her eyes glistening with unshed tears. "It's a brain aneurysm. They're taking her into surgery now." Adil sank into a nearby chair, his head in his hands. The weight of uncertainty pressed down on him as he whispered prayers under his breath. He thought of their daughters, Laila just 15 and Samira only 10, waiting at home, oblivious to the storm that had just upended their lives. In the operating room, the neurosurgical team worked with precision. The lead surgeon, Dr. Yoon, instructed her team as they carefully navigated the delicate procedure to repair the ruptured blood vessel. But despite their expertise, Amira's condition deteriorated rapidly. Her heart stopped, and the monitors emitted a sharp, continuous beep that seemed to fill the entire room. "She's flatlining," a nurse announced, her voice tense. "Starting compressions," Dr. Yoon replied firmly, placing her hands on Amira's chest and pressing rhythmically. Another doctor administered epinephrine, and the team worked tirelessly to revive her. Outside, Adele paced the waiting room, his phone gripped tightly in his hand. The minutes dragged by, each one feeling like an eternity. He clung to hope, but a gnawing fear threatened to consume him. Back in the operating room, the medical team continued their efforts, but Amira's body remained unresponsive. For 6 minutes, she was clinically dead, her heart silent, her brain devoid of activity. What the team couldn't see, however, was that Amira's consciousness had already begun a journey beyond the physical world. Amira's first awareness was of stillness, a stark contrast to the chaos she had just left behind. She felt weightless, as though she were floating in a vast expanse. When she opened her eyes, she was startled to see herself lying motionless on the operating table. Her body, pale and fragile, was surrounded by the frantic movements of the medical team. there? She thought, confusion mingling with a strange sense of calm. It was surreal to watch Dr. Yoon perform compressions on her chest while another nurse adjusted the oxygen mask on her face. She could hear their voices, muffled and distant, as though she were underwater. Time seemed to slow, and every detail in the room became strikingly vivid. She noticed the beads of sweat on Dr. Yoon's forehead, the tension in the hands of the nurse administering medication, and the flicker of the fluorescent lights above. But then her attention shifted. She felt a presence, powerful and undeniable, filling the room. Turning, she saw beams of light surrounding the operating table. These were no ordinary lights. They were radiant and alive, exuding a peace and strength that she had never encountered before. Their forms were majestic, their features indistinct yet unmistakably angelic. These are angels, she realized, her heart swelling with awe. Their presence was comforting, as though they were shielding her from something unseen. Her awe turned to unease when she noticed movement in the shadows. Lurking just beyond the angels' protective circle were darker figures, their forms twisted and grotesque. These shadowy entities exuded an aura of malevolence so intense that it sent shivers through her very soul. She instinctively knew what they were: demons. Their eyes burned with hatred as they watched her intently, their every movement brimming with malice. Yet they dared not approach the angels, whose radiant presence held them at bay. The contrast between the light and the darkness was stark, and Amira's spirit trembled with the weight of what she was witnessing. She realized that a battle was unfolding, not for her body, but for her soul. Before she could process the scene further, she felt a gentle yet irresistible pull. It was as though an unseen force was drawing her upward, away from the operating room. The voices of the medical team faded, and the physical world fell away entirely. Amira found herself traveling through a tunnel of light, the sensation unlike anything she had ever experienced. The light wasn't harsh or blinding, but warm and inviting, wrapping around her like a soft embrace. It seemed to hum with life, resonating with a harmony that touched the deepest parts of her being. As she moved through the tunnel, Amira felt an overwhelming sense of peace. The pain, fear, and confusion that had plagued her moments ago were gone, replaced by a profound calm. She sensed that this was just the beginning of something far greater than she could comprehend. "I'm not afraid," she thought, marveling at the serenity that enveloped her. But where am I going? But if it were just a crash of impulse, it would have no tongue this time. The tunnel opened into a realm of indescribable beauty. The light grew brighter, and she became aware of her surroundings, a place that felt more real than anything she had ever known. But what awaited her in that realm was beyond anything she could have imagined, and it would change her understanding of life, death, and God forever. As the tunnel of light opened into a radiant realm, Amira felt an indescribable warmth wash over her. The atmosphere was thick with peace, yet alive with purpose, as though every particle of light carried divine wisdom. She became aware of a presence, gentle yet overwhelmingly powerful, guiding her deeper into this luminous space. Then, the review began. Amira's life unfolded before her, not as a simple series of memories, but as a multi-dimensional experience. She relived each moment with vivid clarity, feeling not only her own emotions, but also the impact of her actions on others. She saw herself as a young girl, sitting at her father's feet in Jordan, eagerly reciting verses from the Quran. She felt her pride as she memorized the teachings that shaped her identity. But alongside this pride, she also felt the subtle judgment she had harbored toward those who believed differently, including her childhood friend Layla, who had once invited her to a Christmas service. Amira had declined, dismissing Layla's faith as misguided. Now she felt Layla's quiet disappointment and the love behind her invitation, a love Amira had been too blind to see. Scene after scene played out. She saw herself refusing to attend a colleague's Christian wedding, believing it would compromise her Islamic values. In that moment, she felt the sting of rejection her colleague had endured. She saw herself teaching children at the mosque, confidently explaining that Jesus was merely a prophet and not divine. Now, she felt the weight of those words and how they had steered young minds away from the truth. Amira's heart ached as the review continued. Every judgmental thought, every missed opportunity to show compassion, every moment she had rejected or dismissed the truth about Jesus Christ was laid bare before her. Yet, the review was not filled with condemnation. Instead, it was infused with love and clarity, as though the truth was being revealed to her so she could understand and grow. The review faded, and Amira found herself standing in the presence of a figure so radiant, so full of love that words could not fully capture his majesty. She knew instantly who he was. "Jesus," she whispered, her voice trembling with awe. This was not the Isa of Islam, the prophet she had been taught about all her life. This was Jesus Christ, the Son of God. His presence radiated both love and authority, and as his eyes met hers, she felt as though he could see every corner of her soul. "Amira," he said, his voice resonating through her entire being, "I have brought you here to show you the truth." His words carried a weight that pierced her heart. She fell to her knees, overwhelmed by both his love and the realization of how wrong she had been. "I thought I was following the right path," she whispered, tears streaming down her face. "I thought I was serving God." Jesus knelt beside her, his touch gentle yet transformative. "You were sincere, but you were deceived," he said, his tone filled with both compassion and sadness. "I am the way, the truth, and the life. No one comes to the Father except through me." He then began to show her the depths of this deception. Amira saw how Islam, while containing elements of truth, had distorted the fundamental nature of God and his plan for salvation. She saw how the denial of Jesus' divinity and his crucifixion had become barriers preventing millions from recognizing the truth. "I died for you," Jesus said, his words brimming with love. "I took on the sins of the world so that you might have life, but you must choose to accept my sacrifice. My sacrifice literally came to be on the cross so that you would experience life exaltation." Amira wept, her heart breaking under the weight of this revelation. Yet, amidst the sorrow, she felt a glimmer of hope that she could be redeemed. Jesus then showed her visions of the spiritual reality she had never understood. She saw heaven, a place of unimaginable beauty and joy, where souls who had accepted him lived in perfect communion with God. The light there was alive, and every sound resonated with praise and love. But then, he showed her hell. The contrast was stark and terrifying. She saw countless souls in torment, separated from God by their own rejection of the truth. Among them were people she had once respected, devout Muslims, religious leaders, and even some who had claimed to follow Jesus but had distorted his teachings. "This," Jesus said, "is not my will. I desire that none should perish, but each soul must choose." Amira's heart broke as she saw the faces of those she had loved, still clinging to the deception that had blinded her for so long. Where did they meet after decades of separation? What was meant to be a private outing became a distraction for more indefinitely. Finally, Jesus showed her the cross. She saw him hanging there, his body broken and bleeding for the sins of humanity. For the first time, she understood the depth of his sacrifice. "This is the price I paid for you," he said. "Will you accept it?" "Ah," she said. With tears streaming down her face, Amira fell to her knees. "Yes, Lord," she said, "I accept you as my Savior." Amira felt herself being drawn back, the radiant light fading as the physical world came into focus. She gasped for air, the beeping of monitors and the voices of the medical team flooding her senses. "She's back," someone exclaimed, relief evident in their tone. Amira's body ached, but her spirit felt lighter than ever before. She had been forever changed by what she had seen and experienced, in a way she hadn't imagined. The days following her recovery were a whirlwind of emotions and decisions. Amira's faith, once rooted in Islam, had been transformed by her encounter with Jesus. She began reading the Bible, the words coming alive in a way she had never experienced with the Quran. Her family noticed the change immediately. Adil, her husband, grew distant, his confusion quickly turning to anger as she shared her experience. "This isn't you, Amira," he said one evening. "You're being deceived." But Amira stood firm, her newfound faith giving her strength. "I've seen the truth, Adil. I can't go back to the way things were." At the hospital, her colleagues noticed the subtle shifts. She no longer prayed toward Mecca, and her once fervent defenses of Islam were replaced with quiet discussions about Jesus. Amira faced rejection from her community, but she also found a new family in Christ. She joined a local church where she was baptized, publicly declaring her faith in Jesus as her Lord and Savior. Amira speaks directly to the camera, her eyes filled with conviction. If you've ever felt like something is missing, if you've ever questioned whether you're truly on the right path, I urge you to seek Jesus. He is the way, the truth, and the life. No matter what you've been taught or where you've been, His arms are open to you. The screen fades to black as her voice continues. Don't let fear or pride hold you back from the truth. He loves you, and He's waiting for you. Text appears on the screen. If this story has touched your heart, please like, share, and subscribe to help spread the truth about Jesus Christ. Together, we can bring His light to a world in need.